On a February morning in 1969, a man walked out in front of hundreds of inmates, dressed head to toe in black, holding a guitar like a weapon, staring down men some called the worst in America. Cash would later call that morning one of the defining performances of his life. But here's the question almost nobody asks. Why would a man already climbing back to the top walk into a maximum security prison again and let cameras capture every second of it? That question is where this story begins. Not with the legend, with the evidence.
I keep a close watch on this heart of mine. I keep my eyes wide open all the
Every
time.
legend needs an origin. Johnny Cash's is usually told the same way. Poor cotton farming family, Depression-era Arkansas, a boy who sang in the fields. That part is true. But the file on Johnny Cash has a chapter most tellings skip past too quickly, and it may be the single event that explains everything that came after.
He went through many temptations, and he was very vocal about his always dancing with darkness, and I think all people can relate to that.
May 12, 1944. J.R. Cash, that was his real name before the Air Force gave him John, was 14 years old. His older brother Jack, whom he idolized, was pulled into a table saw at the mill where he worked. Jack died a week later, in agonizing pain, with young J.R. at his bedside. Cash carried guilt about that day for the rest of his life. Guilt he almost never spoke about publicly. He believed, in some private, unresolved way, that he should have been the one working that morning, not Jack. Biographers have spent decades investigating what they call the Jack wound, the theory that Cash's lifelong drift toward darkness, gospel music, and self-destruction all trace back to a single afternoon in a small Arkansas mill town.
Love is a burning thing.
It's a theory, but look at the pattern. For the next 50 years, Johnny Cash would repeatedly choose the company of the broken over the comfortable, prisoners, addicts, the poor. Was that empathy, or was it penance?
I find it very, very easy to be true. I find myself alone when each day is through.
By 1954, Cash was out of the Air Force, married to Vivian Liberto, and selling appliances door-to-door in Memphis. He had no formal musical training. He couldn't read music, and yet he walked into Sun Records, the same studio that had just signed a young Elvis Presley, and asked producer Sam Phillips for an audition. Phillips turned him away twice. Cash kept coming back. That persistence is easy to admire in hindsight. At the time, it looked like stubbornness bordering on delusion, a traveling salesman with a two-chord guitar style, insisting he had something new. He did. What came out of that Sun Records session was a stripped-down, percussive, almost mechanical rhythm, later nicknamed the boom-chicka-boom sound. No drums, just Cash's rhythm guitar, a slap bass, and a lead guitar mimicking a train.
When I was just a baby, my mama told me, son, always be a good boy, don't ever play with guns.
It sounded like nothing on the radio. Within 2 years, I Walk the Line made him a star. But success didn't fix anything. If anything, it handed him the means to make things worse.
The lowest point in my life, not just career, was the day, well, I agree, they had a family intervention, they call it. The doctor and the family came around. We talked about my problem while I was still in the hospital in Nashville. And I was convinced that I knew I had a problem. And then after being on morphine, IV, for pain for 12 days, I was really hooked, really hooked. Not that I wasn't before, I was. But I agreed to go to Betty Ford Center. But the low point of my life was the day I walked into that door. You know, you walk in and say, I can't handle it, so I'm putting my life into the hands of the professionals. That's a very humbling thing to do, you know.
Here is where the official story and the real story start to diverge, and where a little investigation matters. For years, Cash's team and the country music press downplayed just how far his addiction had gone. Publicly, he was worn out from touring. Privately, by the early 1960s, he was consuming enormous quantities of amphetamines and barbiturates, uppers to get through 200-plus shows a year, downers to come off them. The evidence is stark when you line it up. A 1965 arrest at the El Paso airport, guitar case stuffed with pills smuggled from Mexico. A 1967 near-death moment where, by his own later account, he crawled into Nickajack Cave in Tennessee, deliberately, without a light, intending to die alone underground. He said he passed out in that cave, and something, he called it God, others might call it exhaustion and dehydration, turned him back toward the entrance. He walked out alive. Whatever happened in that cave, something shifted afterward. Within a year, he'd proposed to June Carter, gotten sober for a stretch, and recorded the album that would define him. Which brings us back to Folsom.
The past and the present come together when Johnny Cash enters this jail.
Who have you got there? I've got Johnny with me. All right, come on in. Put your hand out, please.
So why San Quentin, and why let cameras in? The convenient legend says Cash simply loved prisoners, always had. He'd written Folsom Prison Blues back in 1955 after watching a documentary about prison life while stationed in Germany, and he'd already proven the idea worked a year earlier at Folsom itself.
San Quentin, I hate every inch of you.
But the deeper investigation reveals something more calculated and frankly more human about the decision to go back and to finally let the world watch. A year earlier, in late 1967, Cash's career had been cratering. Record sales had slumped. Columbia Records had considered dropping him. He was, in the words of one executive at the time, a has-been with a drug problem. Producer Bob Johnston pitched something drastic: record a live album inside an actual prison, in front of actual inmates. That gamble, at Folsom State Prison in January 1968, resurrected his career overnight, but no footage of it survives beyond a handful of still photographs. San Quentin was different. By February 1969, Cash didn't need to prove himself again. The Folsom album had already done that. This time, he had something to lose: a clean reputation, rebuilt sobriety, a new marriage. That performance is the reason we can actually see this chapter of his life, instead of just hearing about it. Midway through the set, Cash debuted a brand new song he'd barely rehearsed, A Boy Named Sue, fumbling the lyrics, laughing at himself in real time, the inmates roaring along with every mistake. It wasn't polished, it wasn't supposed to be. That flawed, unscripted take became the single released to radio, and it shot to the top of the country charts and into the pop top 5, the biggest hit of his career.
I'd turn red and some guy'd laugh and I'd bust his head. But I'll tell you, life ain't easy for a boy named Sue.
At San Quentin, for once, he let the cameras catch him human, which leads to the detail people assume they already understand: the black. Ask most people why Johnny Cash wore black, and they'll quote his 1971 song, Man in Black, the one where he says he wears it for the poor, the beaten down, the prisoner, the soldier who never came home. That's the official answer. Cash gave it himself, on record, in his own words. But dig into the timeline, and the truth is messier and more interesting. Cash actually started wearing black years earlier, in the mid-1950s, for a much simpler reason. It was the only color that matched across all 4 members of his original backing band, the Tennessee Two, since none of them could afford matching stage outfits. Black was practical, it was cheap, it looked sharp under bad lighting in small-town auditoriums. So which is it? A political statement or a budget decision? The honest answer, according to those who knew him, is both. The symbol came first as necessity. Cash, a master of turning his own contradictions into meaning, simply grew into the story later, and by the time he sang Man in Black in 1971, he'd lived enough of the reasons on that list to mean every word of it. The costume became the man.
You've been living hell to me.
No deep dive of Johnny Cash is complete without June Carter, and the pattern here too is more complicated than the popular version. The commonly told story: June saved Johnny from addiction, nursed him back to health, and their love conquered his demons. It's romantic, It's also incomplete. June herself, in later interviews, pushed back on the idea that she single-handedly rescued him, pointing out that Cash relapsed multiple times throughout their marriage, in the 1980s and again in the early 1990s, long after the supposed rescue was complete. June didn't fix him once. She simply refused to leave, through cycle after cycle, for over 3 decades, which, depending on how you look at it, is either a deeper kind of love than the fairy tale, or a much harder one.
To a ring of fire, I fell into a burning ring of fire.
June Carter Cash died in May 2003. Johnny, already frail, told friends the loss had taken the fight out of him. He kept recording anyway. Sessions in his final months produced enough material for albums released years after his death, songs some critics consider the most unflinching of his career. Johnny Cash died on September 12, 2003, less than 4 months after June. Officially, the cause was complications from diabetes. Those close to him have long suggested something simpler. He didn't want to be here without her.
I keep a close watch on this heart of mine.